big question to start with, which is where does your specific interest in magazines and specifically collecting magazines come from, and how did you decide which magazines to collect? Because you must have had to have done some big culls over the years.
Yeah, I have done, yeah. I mean, it came from really an appreciation of the printed word, because there must be something genetic in my family. 3 of my older brothers were all librarians. One of them was ended up the president of the American Library Association.
Oh, wow.
So there's a kind of cataloguing, collecting business there as well. And all 5 of my older siblings, got 2 sisters, were all very interested in A, music, and B, fashion or clothing. My great-grandfather was a tailor, my father was a very dapper man, and I was younger by far, and so I was kind of able, while they went through everything from beatnik, Ted, mod, skinhead, hippie, all of those things, because I was younger, I think that, you know, having rationalised it or post-rationalised it, I think I was sitting back and just observing and providing what we're talking about as context. And so I was immediately drawn to print. I was immediately drawn to print about music and about clothing or personal appearance or visual identity or whatever you want to call it. And so I started to really pick up on it probably around the time magazines like this, Rave, were produced in the mid-60s, 67 this is from, and it's got the Monkees on the cover, and the Monkees were really my band. As distinct from my, you know, the next generation, and I think it was the same for a lot of us, because they were very marketed and they were packaged and they were kind of a boy band, but they were beautifully packaged. The songs were really well written. The show was really great and stands up today, and it had Frank Zappa in it and all those people. But if you're a 7-year-old in North London just watching this, and nobody else wants to watch it because they think that it's boring and whatever, but they wear such beautiful clothes as well, and it's that thing which I really like, which is the business about where preppy and Western starts going to psychedelia, but it's very smart. And these shirts were made by Jeannie the tailor, who I wrote about in The Look, who died in this car crash with her boyfriend from Fairport Convention in 1968, 69 I think. Well, my older sister knew Martin Lamble, who was her boyfriend, who died. And so I had a connection to the Monkees as well.
That's interesting.
And I really like Rave. This is only one. I've got loads of them because they're really great, because they talk about, as Malcolm McLaren used to say, the look of music, you know, and the sound of fashion. And it's, you know, they're talking about French mods, I think. There's a feature, there's a shop called Carnaby Street in Paris. And so I would see these magazines, Petticoat, through older sisters, and just really get off on them, because, you know, I mean, look at, you know, Scott Walker there. They just look so amazing. And so that helped me sort of, and they're really cheap. They're kind of mass produced.
It's interesting that you say the printed, when you first started speaking, you said the printed word, but how much of it was the words and the journalism, and how much of it was the aesthetics? Because it seemed like a lot of this was the visuals.
Yeah, I suppose it is the visuals, but, you know, the words meant as much to me, I think, as the music and as the visuals and the fashion. So, yeah, I kind of went to, if the words made sense, and we'll see this as we go through it, then that really helped. I think if the journalism or the writing wasn't up to it, then that would have been one of the reasons you were talking about. Why did I keep stuff? Why did I cull stuff? I mean, mainly I culled stuff because of space or various partners just saying they were sick of being crowded out. I wouldn't have got rid of anything, you know. If I had a castle, I would have filled it to the rafters. But I think that when I bought something, making that decision, and I'm not going to talk about the Face or Idea or any of those, because you don't want to talk about those, because we know about those, but I've got all those as well. But if I made a decision, it had to be the writing or the literacy, as it were. Maybe there wasn't a lot of writing, but the text had to be as strong as the visuals. Even like the captions and that kind of thing. Yeah. It had to have an identity. And so some of this is after the fact. Like, I would never have seen Twen, but it is a very important magazine in design history. So wait, this isn't one you engaged with when you were younger? Not at the time, but I think it's important in the development of what we're talking about, because it was presenting fashion in a really, really strong way. And I think the Continentals did that very well. And this is kind of a men's magazine. in a way, but a lifestyle magazine in that it would have covered cinema, sport, whatever. But these I came across this when I was researching my Mr. Freedom book, and these are Hans Feuer, I think, photographs. But they're just absolutely incredible. But there's Oz, the school kids issue there, which they're linking into Mr. Freedom's pop aesthetic.
Yeah.
But photographed in such a daring and fantastic way that I can see that this is a link to another magazine which really I grasped hold of through an older sister in the UK, which was Nova, which started in 66, I think. I wouldn't have seen it till 68, 69. There was no fashion for kids then, even though there was actually a clothes shop for kids in the early 70s which opened up near me. And so Nova, you know about, was really, really important. These are from the early 70s, and these are, this is where Yamamoto, Ishibayaki are being presented in the most extraordinary way. And I responded to this at the age of 10 or 11.
So you remember actually physically picking up copies of your sister's?
These are my sister's copies.
And do you remember her response to it? It's interesting to think about that.
She kept them.
Did she?
She kept them, yeah. So, but there again, she's got that thing which I've got as well, which is obviously some kind of neurosis that we all have, is that we kind of kept stuff because we realised it was really important. And there weren't very many outlets for fashion at the time beyond Vogue, Harper's, which were showing it in a kind of, how do we say it, not an haute couture way, but not in a street way either, but in a very elegant but approachable and kind of democratic way.
Yeah.
And with invention, I mean, it's really why I ended up working in magazines for 20 odd years, is because I wanted to, work in an area that produced stuff like this, which is the Mr. Freedom spread, which is styled by Caroline Baker, photographs by Peter Knapp. Now, Caroline Baker is really, really important to this story because she was one of the few inventive proto-stylists who was taking clothes and then using them in a very different way from what you would see in Vogue, or not Elle wasn't even launched then.
It's interesting, isn't it, looking at these, and it's interesting particularly the way you talked about Twen, the certain magazines that are kind of remembered by history and those that are forgotten, because I think that's one thing that something like Nova, in the kind of annals of Instagram and Tumblr, hasn't been given that much credit. I don't think.
Yeah, it's true.
It's interesting, isn't it? Certain magazines that kind of, people, there's endless kind of obsession with the face and early ID, but things like, I mean, I guess even like, Rave. Do you think that was a pioneer? Do you think it was?
I think it definitely was, and I think it's not recognised because those people aren't in control of the digital environment because they're too old. Either they're not interested, either they're not interested in applying it. My sister, for example, who's 65, wouldn't use an Instagram account, but she kept the Novas and then gave them to me. And so I think that's one element. The other is that I think everything became very self-aware after punk. And so people kept stuff because you realise that, The Face was a very self-conscious, and ID and Blitz and those magazines, that generation of magazines, just like that generation of designers, were very self-conscious. They knew that they were doing something. These guys were just doing it, and that's why there's a certain purity to this stuff.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Which probably can't be tackled easily online. You could shoot that, you could show that, and it has been shown on an Instagram account, but because people are used to that sort of presentation of clothing now, it doesn't convey the sort of actually kind of radical approach to presenting fashion. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's interesting you say that. I think there's a certain, people feel like they've seen everything now, and I think it's interesting you talk about the purity of these kind of magazines. They have a quiet impact. Some of the editorials is quite different to something. To some of the stuff that is kind of reproduced endlessly online.
Well, what I haven't bought is the examples of the underground press, which I really, really like, which was my coming of age really in the early 70s. A guy down the road when I was 12 gave me a few Aussies, and the local newsagent started selling Friends, and that's a very explosive, very cluttered, very bright, very post-psychedelic presentation. Wasn't actually very good on clothes, which I found eventually disappointed me. It was kind of okay on music, but a lot of those music guys went to the NME, which we'll come to. But I think that there was a staging post there which was missed, but in America it was picked up on by this guy Baron Warman, who was a rock photographer, worked for Rolling Stone, and then launched his own magazine because he was interested in clothes, and so it's got
I love the name
Western.
Rags.
Well, it's so good.
Yeah.
It is so good. It's interested in the whole of the counterculture. So it's interested in where the action is in terms of clothes, which I'm saying the underground press didn't really address because they were quite shabbily dressed. So feel free to have a look at them, but they're really lovely documents.
It's really interesting also that you say America, because I feel like there's this, and maybe it's a myth, maybe it's not, that continues today, which is this idea that London is the home of the niche magazine, London is the birthplace of like the most brilliant style magazines, and nowhere else has really done it quite as well. But would you take issue with that?
Yeah, I would really, because if you look at Playboy in Los Angeles, if you look at Rolling Stone in San Francisco, if you look at We in New York, which the art director of which was Gordon Moore from the Royal College, these were magazines which were really advancing the conversation, but in their own markets in America. And I think we're up ourselves a bit. And if you talk to Nick Logan about the face, he'll be saying, well, it was influenced by Paris Match. They got the barometer thing straight out of Harper's and Queen. So what they did was very cleverly.
Well, this could be ID, couldn't it? Straight up. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of.
I love the variety of it as well. It speaks to everything that was in fashion at that point. So it's peasant, ethnic, Western, hippie, and wild, beachwear. Look at that.
It's amazing.
And now he was a decent photographer, Baron Warman. So he employed, and he took a lot of the photographs, but employed photographers or only accepted photographs which were up to snuff, which I think is an important thing. Look at that.
Yeah.
So these, I didn't know about them at the time, but I think that they are an important. That's great. There is this kind of countercultural thing, but this is now coming. It's 71, I think. 70. It's really beginning to look mid-70s, actually. See Levi Strauss with an accent on Yves Saint Laurent.
This is incredible.
So they're dealing with... So, I like that. And it kind of made sense to me afterwards.
Do you think it would have made sense to you at the time?
No, I'd have loved it. I'd have loved it because it's got that outsider, countercultural, underground aesthetic.
I like that there's a formality to it as well. It's not zine-y.
No.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think you get that later, don't you? Would you say that's one of the things that comes out of punk? Like we talked about sniffing glue and all those zine. Do you think there's a kind of zine aesthetic?
Because that was deliberately amateurish.
Yeah.
And it was amateurish. Mark Perry launched Sniffing Glue, was a bank clerk.
Yeah.
These were professionals, and so you can tell that they're presenting the material in a professional way. But I like a lot of the clothes. I think they're very daring, and I think I like the ideas more. But the next thing for me, which I was aware of, and I've only found one, this was through an older brother, was Interview, which blew my mind.
I think that's one of the things. That's something that you see the influence of more clearly than you do a lot of things like Nova and Rags, which perhaps people aren't aware of. People are the impact of Interview is massive.
But it was at the time because there was nothing else like it. And so in 73 to see this, there's Ozzy Clark, there's Bianca, there's Eric Bowman, but they're in the context of that incredible calmness of presentation, that sort of deadpan.
But yeah, this looks very intriguing now because it goes back to what I was saying before about the zine aesthetic. But I think the real combination of a certain formality and conservatism with something that is kind of daring and, you know, something like counterculture, as we discussed, is quite new. I think now niche magazines or style magazines, they try to look quite haphazard and quite daring.
Yeah.
There's a real formality and yeah, almost conservatism to theirs.
But you've got Scavullo taking the photographs. You've got Andy, the master, you know, overseeing it all. I mean, these people, I wouldn't have known who they were at the time, but they spoke to me, and you know, it was just an incredible thing to absorb, you know, in a very straightforward way, fashion, but also music through these people who are recently dead. It was sort of putting the tin lid on hippie, but you've got New York Dolls here. So I would have read about New York Dolls here, thinking, my God, you know, what on earth is going on? And look at Todd Rundgren there. So they're presented like superstars, of course. And so, you know, then you've got, you know, what the clothing scene is in New York, which was just, you know, on the other side of the universe, as far as I was concerned. So that was really important.
And would you have had any access to these kind of...
This I did, because my brother got it, and Nova.
But do you know how he got it? Like, was it easy to get access
Oh yeah,
to
it's fairly easy. I mean, they were pretty, not hip, but you know, they were, you know, they would go to the right news agents. But I could buy the Underground Press, my local news agents. For some reason, they started stocking it. And in fact, my dad found them and chucked them out, and I just got them out of the bin after he disappeared. But so Nova was readily available. Interview was available in Maida Vale and those places.
Excitement about magazine culture. Do you remember a sense?
Yeah.
Like
no, it's hugely, particularly to do with music, because music. It was only really around the time of punk, I think, that the fashion industry started to realise that they could sell clothes through music. In fact, we all knew as fans instinctively that, wow, Keith Richards got these jewel-coloured, you know, crushed velvet jeans on. Where's he getting from? Granny Takes a Trip. You know, where's he getting those brocade boots from? So we were, and of course Bowie is the great example, isn't he? As music fans, we responded to, if we were interested in clothes at all, so you didn't go to Led Zeppelin or whatever, you went to Bowie or Roxy Music and you knew about Anthony Price, you started to crave all of that stuff. And it was only afterwards that the fashion industry realised that music was the way to, a primary driver for selling.
So do you think it's the early... Do you think these magazines actually, you know, there's all that talk in the 90s when American Vogue starts putting celebrities on the cover, but do you think that these magazines are the point where celebrity, albeit music, enters fashion?
Yeah, definitely. And so I'll show you in a sec, but you'd have interviews where Nick Logan was editor of the NME, so it's no kind of coincidence that people like me gravitated towards it. So this was an important mag as well, Cream, the American mags. Cream was this incredibly rock and roll magazine. They had their own beer and they had Lester Bangs writing for them.
Yeah, maybe it's the beginning also of that idea of magazine as lifestyle brand.
Exactly. Yeah, they knew that music could not be understood in isolation, that the culture around it, whether it was trash culture or whatever culture, had to be considered as interesting and important. And then that culture could actually help sell. And so obviously, you know, it's very sexy as well. And it's kind of sexually predicated and presented in a sort of non-PC way. But, you know, these are scenes of the Rodney's Hollywood scene, starlet scene with the Dolls from 1974. That's, is that Baby Bure? No, that's, I remember her name actually. But anyway, look, she looks fucking amazing. She looks like Jean Harlow in that print dress. And so you'd be getting your information about what's happening in fashion from these.
That's what I'm interested in, I think, in a sense, of you as a young person at the time looking at them, is how much of it felt like something aspirational, something that you wanted to emulate or involve yourself in, and how much of it felt like an accurate sort of reflection of the life you were living?
Yeah, it was by no means the life I was living. It was aspirational, but it was also had to be backed up by great music, which is why Fanny, who looked great here, were actually a pretty terrible band. Susie Quattro's sister was one of them, I think. But kind of the music, the delivery mechanism was of real interest, but eventually it had to come down to whether the music could back it up. But here was something which was totally against the grain of, you know, great coated people like me going to the Roundhouse on a Saturday afternoon. It was another world. So yeah, it was definitely aspirational.
And do you think there comes a flip when magazines try, I want to keep talking about this bit, when magazines try and become more an accurate reflection of life on the street, whereas that's not really what this is.
Yeah, I think that then it becomes boring, because life on the street is quite boring, isn't it? I mean, unless it's that street at that time. I mean, it's no wonder I ended up living in LA.
Do you know how many issues there were of Cream?
Oh yeah, no, it went for years. Yeah, it went into the 80s. But that's just, you know, that's a great example. Now, at the same time, which ones do I do first? Yeah, I'll do these. These are quite early, to avert your eyes from some of this. The men's magazines. Yeah. Club International was launched as a serious magazine. The underground press had fallen to bits for various reasons, drug busts and obscenity busts and everything else, and it kind of lost its way. And a lot of those people gravitated to the men's magazines because this was the era of permissiveness. Also, the magazines themselves realised that, okay, they could knock out nudie shots, but if they clad it in something else, then it might become more interesting. And so they started to run fashion spreads. In Club International, they had George Melly writing for them, Quentin Crisp, these really interesting people.
It's interesting they had someone like Quentin Crisp. So was there quite an interesting interplay between heterosexuality and homosexuality?
Yeah, I mean, there was a flamboyance, and these were all outsiders who gathered around it. So Richard O'Brien from the Rocky Horror Show, all of these people wrote for Club International. And then they got lucky because the fashion editor they employed was this guy, David Parkinson, who I'm working a project on. His widow's given me his all of his archive. Incredible. And so these, for me, these sort of kind of really blow my mind, because these are clothes by Tommy Roberts from his shop, and they're such amazing shots. And some of the clothes are from Let It Rock with Malcolm and Vivian. And this magazine, Club International, was really, really important because it sold in huge amounts, because it had naked women in it, but it presented clothes in a really alluring way. But these are great. Look at this. And this is all YSL. This is Rive Gauche. This is just Chelsea Cobbler.
It's amazing nudes of the time. That is fucking incredible.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, it's a very classy magazine.
Yeah.
And some of the graphics are really great. You've got some great people there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so, you know, this would be...
I like how high... It's interesting, that real kind of... You know, you think today and you think of lad mag culture, you know, that when that exploded, but you think of... To have the depiction of nude women in a really kind of like aspirational, high-class way that's very much about fashion.
Yeah,
you know, the nude in fashion. Like this, even though she's got flowers in her pubic hair, and it's really like... kind of quite like about aesthetics and ideas. It's not necessarily about the body. It's really interesting.
So you see what I mean about it being post-underground press.
Exactly, yeah.
Because in fact, in one of these issues, David's photo of Rosie Boycott and Marsha Rowe, there's an interview with them about Spare Rib. Amazing. So it's great that they're pushing that at an audience who wouldn't be, you know, necessarily expected to accept it. And so this is an important one in the story of Let It Rock, and also because I was becoming aware of Let It Rock then and what Malcolm was up to. And so this is 8 pages on Let It Rock with these beautiful photographs. So, I mean, they're just, you know, just incredible. And so there's Malcolm there. There's that great spread from Brixton. To use a black model even, but particularly in a 40s suit in that context. It's really good. And so, you know, a lot of people responded to that because maybe Bowie was kind of losing his way, maybe Brian Ferry had gone up his own arse. And so here was a street, graspable thing. You know, you could go to the Emperor of Wyoming in the King's Road and you could buy that shirt. But they're presented in almost an abstract fashion. there is this area of fashion which wasn't being reflected in the main fashion magazines, which is really where the action was at.
Yeah.
Which became the food and drink of the style mags of the 80s and 90s. Well, you know about West One.
Yeah.
This is my favourite issue, which has this thing on London Bells, and these photographs are just amazing. This is Janet Street Porter really showing herself as a great tastemaker, I think.
Yeah. This is fantastic.
I can't find these anywhere, and my friends...
Also such a model for modern magazines as well, which is fascinating. Those questions, star sign, what animal would you be, favourite... You know, it's the modern contributors page, isn't it?
Yeah. And the variety of people there. My favourite is... Well, Vivian's in there, but her.
That's
just
amazing.
Incredible.
And this, you were saying to me, this was aimed at working women.
Yeah.
And do you think that, is this one of the early magazines that goes for that?
It's the only one I knew. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I think there was one a bit later on, but yeah, this is 73, 74. I think it lasted for less than a year. I think maybe women were...
Why do you think it went out of print? Was it...
I think it was probably a great idea, but it probably cost a lot to print. And also the 3-day week did really go for, business in this country. And so it's no surprise that it went down the Swanee then. So that's West One, really. I think that...
Which I feel has been forgotten completely.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't think any...
I'm the only person who's ever written about it.
Yeah.
And it's not a big boast. I think more people ought to be writing about it.
100%.
But it certainly disappeared.
Yeah.
So this is another one I found out about retrospectively, which is around the same time. It's a gay magazine, but it was a theatre magazine. So there obviously wasn't, there were probably difficulties with actually...
Do you think it masqueraded as a theatre magazine because it was a gay magazine?
Yeah, definitely. So they had these things, but it's quite good on fashion and also lifestyle. So I suppose it is that sort of gay thing of wrapping everything up together. So it's film and theatre. But it seems to me, it was out of San Francisco. It was quite important because it was covering people like Jackie Curtis and the Cockettes as part of that. Lovely. There was all this kind of craziness, which was really happening in the cities on both coasts and Chicago, as far as I know, in the 70s, which was far more exciting than what was happening here because we were and probably still are in some ways such a repressive society. And it's important for Malcolm's story because he went to New York, 73, blew his mind, went back there, stayed there for 6 months, and all of those ideas of fetishist behaviour, not deviant, what's the word? There's a better word than that that's less pejorative, but kind of adventurous sexual behaviour and modes of visual expression then fed into what we knew later. But what's interesting about After Dark is the photography is really great.
Yeah, exactly.
And so David Bowie got his cover for Young Americans from this. And I went up to Glasgow to give a talk there, and one of the teachers there on the fashion courses was saying that she's got a whole thing about the effect of Young Americans and Station to Station, David Bowie's look on football casuals in the 70s. But it's great to think that it came out of this kind of gay, theatrical...
Well, that's what I was interested in when you talk about people like Malcolm, is how much were, be it designers, be it musicians, be it whoever, drawing actual inspiration from these magazines, because often we think of it's a one-way process, that these magazines were drawing their content and their articles from what's going on, but I wonder how much they're giving back to it as well.
Well, that's probably it. If you want a definition, I think that they're probably, the magazines that I like were driving the culture. Yeah. They were taking stuff from the outer limits, putting it into the mainstream, and enabling people much more powerful and interesting than me to then take those messages and build something out of them. I think that's probably it. And so the NME, I hate to sound like a boring old git, but the NME is really, really important.
Yeah, of course.
Because Nick had employed these people from the underground press, not least this strange character Nick Kent, who became a superstar in his own right. And in this magazine, which I remember very well reading, in this copy, in April 74, so I'd have been 14, they had this article by Nick Kent about fashion and music. And there's Malcolm there. There's Jean Crell of Granny Takes a Trip, now of Condé Nast. There's Anthony Price. There's a couple of other people as well. Boy George's old landlady, Jean Sell. But they're really talking about interesting ideas, a couple of them. Of course, Malcolm. And Malcolm sees it all as an artistic statement. If nothing else, it's certainly blah, 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 blah. His vision of clothing, tends to be vehemently opposed to almost every other aspect of the rag trade. He considers them horrifying, Mention Brian Ferry, he almost bursts a blood vessel. I think he's leading the kids astray. So to read this, Nick, as a great editor, was, and always interested in visual expression, was basically commissioning Kent to look into the connection between fashion and music.
It's interesting, as you say, kind of the seriousness with which it's written about. It's very different to kind of the pop mags as we would think of something like Smash Hits, which is so irreverent. Smash Hits is all about taking the piss, whereas this is quite cerebral, really, like very long form, very much
and demanding.
Ideas.
And demanding.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
150,000 readers, most of them under 20. If you think most people left school at 16, then it is demanding a lot of it. But the thing about The Enemy from about 74 onwards was that it had a critique, it had a position, and either you were on board or you weren't. And it's one of the things that led into it. But I think that that's very important when it comes to clothes as well as music. Well, basically anything as well. So that's an important example. It's not an important. It's an example of how important the music press could be.
Yeah.
In terms of moving people forward.
And did people call it Enemy, or did they call it New Musical
Enemy.
Press?
It's always The Enemy. And then this one is 5 months later, and it's where they got it wrong. And it's great because I really, I remember, and I won't be alone in thinking, these guys really don't know as much as the audience. And I think the audience were...
you never tried to pitch or anything?
I did once, when I was 18, I got a rebuff. And as I say, I was quite shy, so I kind of just took it. Where is this? Roxy Fashion Parade. No, I didn't go to this gig, I went to the next one. But it basically lambasts the audience for dressing up, and they're basically proto... Sorry, here we go. So he and Anthony came up with this gaucho look, which was just incredible. I thought people like there's lots of old bores like Kevin Rowland and me and everything. Just think, wow, what a guy. And so the audience responded in kind. With this great. That's Swanky Modes, I think. That's great. I don't know whether that's Steve Strange. He looks like him. But there's sort of several iterations of. A post-hippie response, really, post-glam response, really. And so they lambast the audience. They're saying, well, the audience only cares about surface. And in the same way that the Malcolm interview, the one with Jean Crell and Malcolm, was really encouraging, this was actually quite encouraging to go, well, actually, Grandad, you've got it wrong. Because I was coming on 15 by then and starting to dress a lot more pointedly, I think that's great because then it starts to flip, and I think that in pop music certainly it starts to flip because the kids who formed the Sex Pistols actually had far more nous about what was important in terms of delivery and visual expression than did maybe Brian by that point.
And do you think that's the point where you then also get the rejection of the main press and people want to make their own zines, and you get that sense of actually, why do I care what you're going to write about me?
Yeah. So I think it's the start. It's the beginning of that. And then this was important again. There was a short-lived magazine called Street Life, which was an attempt at an English Rolling Stone, and it was okay because it covered sport and it was kind of well-meaning.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned sport because that was one of the things that I was going to talk about. Is none of these magazines that we've really looked at have any coverage of sport at all, even the more kind of the men's ones.
Yeah.
And whereas that's such a staple of a modern magazine, you get that. I think even.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I gave up following football. I gave up. I'm not into sport at all, particularly football. I think it drains young male revolutionary energy, as Brian Eno said.
But then maybe actually I'm wrong, because if you think about it, the Face never really engaged with sport. And
it did a bit. It did with casual culture.
Yeah, that's
and then in the 90s, it kind of got on that.
Yeah.
But there were only, there was Shoot and a couple of kind of kids magazines really, which guys who were into football bought. So this did cover sport, but it was all a bit too well-meaning. It was all a bit too nice. But they did have this interview, and I'd met Malcolm by then.
Fabulous. Would you buy him a rubber t-shirt?
And he's actually talking about kids have a hankering for a new movement. And he doesn't really talk about fashion, but he talks about what's happening. And the Sex Pistols had formed, and the conversation is, moving on up. But it's still sort of based in some kind of radical fashion statement, like his
he
shirt
says that wearing these clothes will affect your social life. Sex promises. Ordinary fashion is just concerned with beauty factors to the exclusion of social ones. So there is that.
Yeah. So this closed down a few months later. But it was interesting that these interesting fashion ideas were then beginning to infiltrate.
So who read this then? What was the difference, or was it the same?
It would have been slightly would have been slightly older than the NME. It would have been people like my brother, sort of 22, 23-year-olds who were into the whole range of music. So it'd be today's Mojo reader.
Okay.
So it was a bit boring. It's another interesting magazine to collect.
Yeah.
So I talked to Peter Saville about this as well, and Nick Logan, and men like us. They're slightly older than me, but men like us. Yeah, I'd just like to point that out. But we couldn't find fashion anywhere. There were no men's magazines, as you know.
Yeah.
But Peter York in Harper's and Queen had been given his head by Willie Landels, the editor, and he wrote this article called Them, which you maybe have heard of, which kind of wrapped it all together. I think he'd already defined Sloane Rangers. So Peter was employed to write a series of articles which were very after Tom Wolfe in terms of looking at social phenomenons. And he came up with this word for these people who were pre-punk being defined, from Dougie Fields to Malcolm and Vivian. And so it took in everybody from Anthony Price, but it was also it's interesting, it's post-Roxy music in a way. They were sort of out of the window now. So what was out of the frame? So what was...
So was it more like Lou Reed? Who is it?
Well, it'd be very English, very London-based. It'd be all the people, kind of not Miss Mouse, she'd be out. Janet Street Porter was in. So, in the middle of this, in the middle of Harper's, Peter starts delivering these summaries of social phenomena. And so art school influentials in the Them movement. So Bowie's in there, Michael Roberts, who's now at Vanity Fair, but he's very important. There's Anthony. And so the pretext is that there was this sci-fi movie where there were these green monsters called Them. And so it's like, oh, he's one of them. And that's what they would say. So I used to go to the Rama unit in Kensington. And so it would be, there's a guy there wearing unbleached Levi's, tight-legged, so straight, unbleached Levi's, Lacoste t-shirt, snowy tennis shoes, no watch, nothing else. It is a clean, functional get-up, paired to the minimal, for he too is a them, big league. That's Michael Roberts.
And did your mum point this out to you, or did you stumble?
No, I just found it and I just had it.
And do you know how she would have engaged with something like that?
Well, she would have thought it was quite funny because she was quite eccentric herself, and my brother by that time had been working down the road from Sex, and so she was used to us wearing, him in particular, but interesting clothes.
As to why Harper's felt it relevant to their audience. Was it in a kind of
it's very Kensington, Chelsea.
Yeah, that's true.
And so these people then would have been walking past the houses which are advertised in the back. But there's Hockney, there's Paul Howie, Miss Mouse is of them, there's Dougie. I must send that to him. But it's really fascinating because it's international thems, Edie Sedgwick. A lot of these people wouldn't really enter our conversation here for 20 odd years. Antonio Lopez, they're all totally recognisable now. But it's a kind of guide to them. Everything them couturiers, them clothes shops, swanky modes, Acme Attractions, Sex as a parter, interior designers. So it's really beautiful thing, I think. And I think
it's amazing.
changed the culture.
The heroes and heroines, Schiaparelli, Grace Coddington, Charles James.
Yeah. It's everyone who, if there hasn't been a retrospective of any of those people, I'd be very surprised.
I know, this is almost like an exhibition catalogue
Yeah.
of all the great people. Them Hates, Mary Quant, Habitat, all 60s made it people, grey haired blue jeans boys, the Sunday Times. Other people pretending to be them, heavy hippies, Gucci.
So at this point, my brother had a flat in Kensington where I moved when I was 17. And this sums up, it really crystallises a very, it's an important moment in my life, but I think it's, everything comes from this really afterwards. And I think it probably gave Nick the impetus to launch The Face, because he knew that there'd be an audience for it. It's a defined, because if you weren't a them, then you aspired to be a them. So there was a market.
Which it kind of says there, they don't like people that aspire to be them.
So the other outlet for fashion, which I would get through my girlfriend, whose mother had the Novas that my sister didn't have, were these. And so we'd look at these a lot, because we shared a lot of sort of fashion interests. It's
and why Honey is an interesting title in a sense, isn't it? Because it's very
patronising.
Yeah.
And 19, So these were girls' mags, under 20-year-old. But this is 19, and there's the slits, being called ugly, but looking absolutely the bomb.
Oh my god, the fashion's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good. And there's kind of this English pastoral thing going on.
Yeah.
Or the fashion business is trying to sell it, but it ain't taking really, because there's something far more interesting happening.
Do you think men's fashion was more kind of tribes related and girls' fashion was less so, or is it just the case that kind of like history's missed out the kind of tribal side to female fashion? It
became tribal after 79, when the mod revival and the rockabilly revival and the skinhead revival and all of those things happened.
But girls' fashion's never really done that in the same way.
No, I mean, if you look at that, they're taking on punk.
Yeah.
But they're a pair of strawberry studio trousers. These are all, I think Miss Selfridge is in there. It's not tribal, it's not punk.
Yeah.
But punk's incorporated in a sort of not slightly tougher look. This is 3 years before The Face launched, and that didn't really get going in terms of men's fashion for a couple of years. I was kind of getting my stuff from these places.
So would you have ever called any of the magazines that we've looked at so far unisex magazines? Because I feel like that's the big, not a taboo, but it's the big failing point in magazine culture, is the ability to create a really good unisex magazine. Like Another tried, Split.
Yeah. I think it really shows unadventurousness. I guess Interview, but that would have been mainly gay men and women and people like me. Just guys who are really interested in fashion who weren't finding it anywhere else, but we'd be in a minority. The brother who turned me onto that is gay, so he naturally gravitated to that. Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's probably to do with the fact that the fashion industry doesn't want to sell to, because it'd probably lose half the money, wouldn't it, if it sold to two people.
Yeah, it's too complicated with advertising.
It's actually real easy. Malcolm always talks about that. In 76, 77, I think 76, this launched. I've only got these three from the 80s, but which is when it was on the wane. But it was kind of it's David Bailey and
which is a copy
David
of Interview.
Litchfield. It was a copy of Interview, but because it had English content, it was look. There's a nice Issey Miyake ad, which you wouldn't see anywhere else. You wouldn't see it in the NME, and you wouldn't see it in 82, even in The Face. And so it was quite nice. And they did menswear supplements, but it's mainly women's wear. I mean, it's very Interview.
Yeah, very, very Interview.
But it had that kind of cute English thing to it. I like the fashion spreads, I must say. So I would buy every single one of these.
Spied Stephen Jones.
Yeah, look at it, look.
That is fabulous.
I didn't recognise it in there.
Oh my god.
It's great, isn't it?
It's fantastic.
Because it also shows a great kind of English
There's a real English
eccentricity
humour and
or-
eccentricity as well,
yeah.
that kind of self-deprecating, slightly awkward, but very
Slightly
self-aware.
nutty.
And do you remember this taking off?
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's real big. It was real big. It was really, really good.
But
And
do you
then
remember, as it became big, do you remember people saying, "Oh, I've got to see Ritz" or anything like that? How often would that happen with magazines, or it was a kind of a word of mouth thing?
Yeah, not very much with me, because I'd be sort of on my own. My friends weren't into it, you know. I'd be on my own, or me and my girlfriend would pore over it. I think, you know, we were quite isolated. But it was big for the time.
Yeah.
And then Willie Daly launched this, which you've seen. And it was a brave attempt, really, I think. It didn't quite take. But it's really quite nice. I mean, these are great, I think. I don't think it was a fantastic magazine. I don't think it was as successfully realised as The Enemy in its pomp, as Interview, as, you know, Club International even. I think it was because it's too bitty. And, you know, as a magazine specialist and, you know, something of a professional, you know, the layout's no good. I mean, that's a terrible layout. I'm sorry. The way the text is presented there, I mean, these are great images. That's really not well presented. It's not, you know, at least Ritz had that great grid going on. Yeah, the photography is not well produced.
Yeah.
If you look at Ritz, but it's variable and it's kind of corny.
And I guess for you, do you remember this having any real impact? I guess Too Short a Life.
Too Short a Life, and it was a very busy period at that point, because there were a lot of fanzines around, and there was a lot of activity in '78, and this was probably considered to be a bit too old and sober.
I thought it's interesting that I wonder if you were going to say too niche and artistic.
No, I don't think so. I think it would have been Alan Jones and Peter Blake were old farts, you know. They were Willie's generation. Willie had worked with Tommy, so it's a bit hit and miss. So I'm not surprised it didn't last. I think the format's the font's too big, the format's too clunky. So for me, it's an interesting curio.
Yeah.
I moved to LA in 1990 and stayed there a couple of years, and really changed my mind about lots of things, including music and clothes and stuff like that.
What made you want to go to LA? Was it the idea of LA that you were seeing in these magazines?
No, it wasn't. It was a job, basically. I was working on a film industry magazine. I was running Screen International's office there, and I had some family there, and I lived in London all my life, and I just wanted to get away. And so I kind of got into a different culture there, which was early 90s, which became that sort of, first time I saw Billy Childish was there. It became that sort of trash culture, thrift culture. Yeah. I've got loads of little thrift magazines actually somewhere, which were just one-offs. It was about a different appreciation of low culture, I think. And then out of that came all of this stuff. So the Beastie Boys produced Grand Royal, which I just think is a great, great, great magazine. And I wrote about it at the time. I interviewed the editor, and they were just all over the place. It's really funny because, they just could not get their act together. But when they did, I mean, there's a whole sneaker thing there, which is like a life lesson in sneakers.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that as a niche magazine for really kind of hetero boys who are interested in fashion, but they're more interested in sports clothes. They're not interested in this kind of fae type stuff that you see in the other magazines, that kind of men's. And I think something like this is interesting.
Well, remember, by 1990 we'd been through the first decade of the Face.
Yeah.
Blitz which was always a pretty poor magazine,
but Blitz
was just about collapsed.
Yeah.
And ID had done that thing of changing, and I think it stopped predicting the culture. So Acid House, would have happened without any of these.
Yeah.
Which I think is another thing. And so, having gone through the Acid House wash and being at that age, didn't really want to be seeing what Brian was wearing.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that kind of Issey Miyake deconstructed black suit.
Yeah.
Sloane Street actually, I've never got back from that actually. And I think, you know, I think I'm a fair weather vane. I think lots of other people felt the same way. So I just wanted to be a bit freer, and LA was a great place to do that and start investigating art and fashion and music. But then fashion for me became part of a mix, which was whether it was about Moog or sneakers. And of course there was X-Girl as well as X-Large. They were both in the shop in Los Feliz, which was just down the road from this gallery, La Luz de Jesus, and there was the Wacko shop. And so all of these things, this was free, and this was run by two girls for 10 years. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I haven't seen it.
But they'd have a theme and issue.
Who's Ben?
Yeah, he was, I think he was in Melrose Place.
Yeah.
Or Beverly Hills 90210. They started it. It was based on one of their characters.
And where was it? Was it?
It was
when
LA
you say
based.
Free,
It was free. Yeah, you could just get it in record shops, cafes.
In the way that like early Vice was, I guess.
Yeah, it was just piled up everywhere. Ben is Dead is just. It's not necessarily fashion, though. Fashion's in there, or visual presentation, because I don't think Americans really into fashion, are they?
Yeah, not in the same way. No.
They don't have the culture. It's just part of the mix. So it's kind of post grunge, post diet girl. That's a new.
You've coined a new. That's quite good, actually. Your subconscious.
You can't use that. I've got to go home and register that.
You can christen this generation of women diet girls.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's fabulous.
Just another
genius moment.
Yeah. So post riot girl. Kind of messy, but not intense at all.
Yeah.
Not up itself. The fact that it was free is just fucking amazing.
I'm interested in a lot of the magazines you've shown me don't have that kind of we're cool, you're not, you want to be like us. And like interviewing someone like Jefferson Hack, he'll talk, very astutely about creating that sense of a kind of something to aspire to. And yeah, I guess trying to create this like life of, the day's life is cool and you should try and be like this, and there's that removal from your reader that I find interesting, the magazines that don't choose to have that and the magazines that do.
I'm a Democrat, I'm not an elitist.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, top ideas, but I really, really despise all of that stuff.
But that's kind of been lost from magazine culture, hasn't it? That idea
I think it's been lost from culture.
We and you, the reader, think this. It's very much become, we think this and you should think it too.
But it's fashion as well. But I'm interested in interesting ideas being in the mainstream. That's really what makes me tick. And so from The Enemy to Club International, a lot of these had big circulations, but a lot of them had really wild ideas in them.
Do you think that's why people often talk about print being dead, and I think they refer to this idea, quite simplistic notion, that it's just because of the internet, and the internet has killed print in the way that video killed the radio. But do you think that the death of print is more complex than that? Do you think it relates?
I don't think print's dead.
Do you not?
No, I just think it's there's less money to be made out of it, which is why a lot of these people are saying, that print's dead, and so they're trying to find ways, desperately unsuccessfully, as far as I can tell, from making money out of the internet. But print's not dead, because.
But why aren't there these brilliant magazines?
Because people aren't brave enough anymore, or inventive enough. A lot of these people had to go out on a limb. And some of them failed, like Willie. Some of them didn't last long, like The Enemy. Probably had about 2 years in that sort of,
glory years,
wonderful kind of madness that was going on before the IPC management sat on it. And the Beastie Boys had enough money to let it trickle out. So I just think that, it's a niche activity. It's more niche than it was, but it's still an activity.